All right, we're live. Howdy, everybody. God bless y'all. I'm here tonight. My original guest had to uh, cancel, so in a pinch, I got Mom instead. We're going to talk about her sightings and some local area experiences we've heard about and stuff like that. Give everybody a couple minutes to jump on here. Internet's been a little bit slow. Everything's taking a while to load. So, anyway, like I said, I'm here with Littlefoot, aka Mom. She's off to the side here. She's kind of like Bigfoot, kind of camera shy. Say hello.
Oh,
Can anybody hear her? I got one watcher. They'll let me know if they can comment here on YouTube. Or... I'm going to throw the link up here on Facebook as well. That way I'll be able to see comments. Hopefully everybody can hear Mom all right. Okay, we'll start out with your two sightings since you've had the better sightings than I have. Start out with the first one, I guess, and just tell them where you was at and what you was doing and what happened.
it was on the afternoon after I got home from work and I went to the mailbox and I looked up a road towards the curb and the little boy was coming around the curb and I seen something walk out in the road on his back feet, looked to be 3 or 4 foot tall, and go on across the road and I never thought anything about it. Never even thought about Bigfoot or anything like that. Murray come in from work. I was telling him about it. He kind of grinned, and we got telling other people, and they kind of looked at me funny and kind of got making fun of me. And I said, "What are you all laughing about?" They said, "You don't know what it was." And I said, "No, well, really, I thought it was a raccoon." Then when I told them how big it was, they said, "I don't think raccoons get that big. Even baby ones don't get that big." And I said, "Well, what was it then?" I said, "Was it a bear?" And they all just kind of grinned at me and went on their merry way. And I said, "Well, okay." And then we got talking about it, what it looked like and everything. And I said, "Well, it looked to be 3 or 4 foot tall, walking on his back legs, kind of had some gray and black in it. Just walked down in the road and crossed the road and went on down the hill." And I like I say, I never give it no thought. They all just kind of laughed at me and went on. And then they got to tell me, they said, "You sure it wasn't a small baby Bigfoot?" And I said, "Well, I really don't know. I wasn't close enough to tell a whole lot about it. I was quite a distance from it." And they picked on me for a long time because I couldn't tell them what for sure what it was. But I guess it's possible that's what it was. I just wasn't thinking. I was trying to hurry up, get back in the house and things. And then next time, Mary was down over the hill here doing Bigfoot things, and I was sitting out on the deck. It was on a Sunday, 4 or 5 o'clock, and I was sitting out there on the deck, and I was looking at the same place where this happened before. And I saw something cross the road and go under the big tree up there and go on down the ridge. I tried to figure out what it was. I kind of thought this time it wasn't on its back legs, it was on all four down running, and it was black. Mary come back up. I said, "Mary, I saw something up there again in that curve." I said, "I don't know what it was." We kind of walked up that way and got to looking. on both sides of the road, and there was some pretty good sized tracks there. And he said, "What do you think it was?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I thought it was a bear that was down on all 4 feet running." I said, "But it was black." I said, "I tell you, it was black." And he went on back up there and took some pictures of the footprints and things. And the neighbor boy come down the road, and they were looking at it and things. I said, "Well, it could have been a bear. That's pretty good sized footprints." So I really don't know that that's what I seen was a Bigfoot, but everybody says it was. And I said, "Well, I'm glad I didn't know, because if I had known that's what it was, I probably made a new door to the house."
All right, let's go back to the first one. When I got home from work, it had stopped, but you said it was drizzling raining that afternoon when you saw it?
Yeah, it was misty like rain, like an old rain.
Kind of cloudy and overcast. If I remember right, I walked up the road to where you saw it, and it ended up being 60 yards or something like that. I took a tape measure with me, dropped it down on the road, just pulled it up and told her, tell me to stop when I get to however tall it is. If I recall, it was just a smidgen above 3 foot. It come up above my belt line, maybe up around my belly button, mid sternum. So it made it about between 3 and 3.5 foot tall. Like I told her, there's not a raccoon on earth, even on its hind legs, 3 or 3.5 foot tall. And we have black bear in Kentucky, not usually in this part of Kentucky, north central Kentucky. So even when they're on their hind feet, a black bear shuffles along. They don't run like an almost sprint, like she described to me. So I kind of ruled raccoons and mostly ruled a bear out. So it only really left one thing in my mind would be a juvenile, or maybe even not juvenile, a infantile Sasquatch. Did you notice anything about how broad its shoulders or chest or anything was? Or
No, not really. I just noticed it was walking on its back feet across the road, had its arms and hands hanging down its side.
did you notice how long the arms on it were? If they hung down to its waist or its knees, or
They were pretty good length.
did they swing or anything when it walked? Or,
I never paid that close attention to it. Like I said, I was trying to hurry and get back in the house. Never even give it no thought.
and the second one, the one you saw that went up behind the tree and then on down that hill into that valley there, that's a pretty steep incline for anything. Down past that tree, down in that valley. How big do you think it was? Dog size, cow size?
It was pretty good size. It was probably as big as a cow or maybe bigger. It was hard to tell. It was going along pretty swiftly.
And that's another thing I considered. Where she saw it there, the field it was in with the big oak tree. I know I've shown him pictures and stuff. That's on a neighbor's property. I couldn't go over there and really follow any tracks or anything. So, but being that big, he didn't have any cattle in that field at the time, and moving that fast on four, even on four legs, that pretty much narrows it down to a black bear or a Sasquatch, which have been reported to go down on all fours at times, like on a steep decline like that. And what was curious is both were in the daytime. One was later afternoon, going towards dusk and the rain and gloom. But the second one was pretty much broad daylight. I remember that because I'd been down in the field and woods behind the house. Like she said, it was 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, sunny and clear outside. So she, both times, whatever it was, broke cover, come out in the open, crossed the road, and went down in that valley in broad daylight, which raccoons don't tend to come out in broad daylight. And of course, most people think Sasquatch are more or less mostly nocturnal as well, but not like anything else with it. That's theory and speculation. There's been plenty of daytime sightings. So that's her two encounters. I thought tonight we'd go over some of the stuff that's went on around here on our property and the area around it. Other than that, I know recently I talked about getting whistled at. Now the whistling started back when I was the only Bigfoot believer in the family. At that point in time, Mom didn't really think Bigfoot was real. And we can explain what kind of brought her around later on. But you heard the whistles before I did.
Yeah, I used to hear them of more when I go out to feed the cats and start the car, getting ready to go to work, and I'd hear them back behind the house here down in the holler there. I thought it was some kind of bird, but it wasn't daylight, it was dark. And I heard them down in there whistling, and I said something very bad, and he just kind of grinned. Well, I had no idea what it was. I never heard anybody say anything about them whistling. So we went to one of them shows up there to Lexington, and Bobo was
there. That was the first year. It was in Frankfurt.
Bobo was there, and we was talking about it, and he told us that they did whistle. When he started telling about them whistling, I thought, oh my God. And there I was out there by myself in the dark, nobody around. I thought, reckon that's really what it was. But I never heard anybody say anything about a whistle. But about the same time every morning when I would go out to go to work, start the car, and feed the cats, I would hear a whistle. It didn't just whistle one time. I mean, it whistled several times. I still didn't know what it was. Still don't know what it was.
All right. Now, these whistles, I'll let you describe what they sound like to you, and then I'll describe what the ones I've heard sound like.
They was just a real shrill whistle like. I mean, it wasn't like a bird whistling or anything like that. It was kind of shrill like.
All right.
And I thought it was some kind of maybe night bird that was still out after because it was still dark and everything. I never given no thought, but it was real shrill. It was really like, I mean, it wasn't no just a simple whistle.
Now, I haven't heard the whistles as often as I've only heard them 3 or 4 times combined over the past 3 or 4 years. The most recent was one I did the video about where I found the print. Me and our bloodhound Bo Stevens got whistled at in broad daylight. Before that, the only time that really sticks out in my memory, I had come home from work one night, and this was anywhere between 10:30 and 11 o'clock at night, pretty much the middle of the night. And at the time, I drove an Impala, and I was getting out of the car, opened the driver's side, and I reached back in, and leaned over to the passenger seat to get something. I brought home a snack or a drink, and this thing whistled, and it was so loud, I thought it was literally right behind me in the yard, close enough I was going to turn around and be able to shake hands with it. So I did kind of the Scooby Doo. I really want to turn around and see what did that. So I turned around kind of slow, and all I saw was some movement shaking the brush and trees down the hill to the backyard by the fence line where it goes down in the field and the woods. Looked like it was something pretty good took off down through there, which from where I parked the car at that time down to that fence line and tree line there on the other side of it, I don't know, 30 feet maybe. So while it wasn't sneaking up on me, it was close enough. And both times, those 2 times in particular, this whistle, like she said, it had a real shrill pitch to it, the volume, how loud it was for it to be 30 or so feet away from me and sound like it was right behind me. And the day me and Bo Stevens got whistled at, now that day it whistled repeatedly, and I tried whistling back, which I can't whistle real well. They were as loud like that, and they were long. And I got me a Ozark Trail survival whistle to see if I could replicate it. Try to kind of experiment, see, blow the whistle, see if I get whistle back at. It hadn't worked so far. But I can't come anywhere near as loud on that survival whistle as the whistles I heard were. The pitch and tone are similar, but the volume and the length, I can blow a whistle and come close, probably about the same. But just the pure volume of it. And like I told Mom, I try to use a common sense approach figuring things out. If it was a bird, even some kind of oddball, rare bird that comes and goes, you would hear it more often. You wouldn't hear it once today and maybe not hear it for a week or two or even a month or two. And then all of a sudden start hearing it again. And if it was a bird out there, you wouldn't hear it once or twice and then stop. Birds tend to call, if not constantly, fairly regularly. And the chances of there only being one or whatever kind of bird this might be that just whistles once in a great while, just to me didn't make sense. Because I know some people try to say it's a water crane. Well, the nearest water would be that lake at the bottom of the valley there on the neighbor's property, and it's at least a mile away, maybe closer to two. I'd say between a mile and a half, 2 miles down to that lake. And there's a creek that runs out of it. It runs back through the hills there and hollers, and it's every bit as far away. So for a water crane to come that far from water, I think would be unusual. Well, we got 3 watchers and no comments yet. Hope everybody can hear us all right and everything. The internet was being kind of slow earlier. Oh, 18's live with Coach John Calipari. No wonder nobody's watching or commenting. I'm going up against the Wildcats tonight, apparently. Anyway, so that explains the whistles or our experiences with the whistles. Now, you heard them several times.
Oh, yeah.
And really, at that point in time, even though I've been a Bigfoot believer since I was a small child, basically grade school and up, I've talked about Dad bringing a book home from the library and me looking at the pictures and being just hook, line, and sinker fascinated with it, even then. But even then, with the whistles, I didn't really equate them to Bigfoot either. I hadn't heard a whole lot about them whistling until we went to the conferences and heard various researchers talk about it, like Bobo. And there's a lot of stuff that went on here before we put 2 and 2 together and really come to the conclusion what we were dealing with. And it really all started with what we call the thumps. And we both experienced this late at night. There's a walnut. Now, I mean, it's just only 10 times louder and harder than that. There's a walnut tree in the backyard, and forever I told her, Mom and myself, that's just walnuts falling out and hitting the roof. The wind blowing them out of that walnut tree. Well, then every now and then they get harder. And I mean, they got louder and harder. And this is always up during the dead of night. And I just kept convincing myself that's walnuts hitting the roof. Until one night we were both in bed. Her bedroom's in the far end of the house from mine here. And it was probably, I'd worked late that night and was home, got ate, showered, and had laid down. Wasn't quite asleep yet, but it was probably 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was just starting to doze off. And I mean, wham! It literally shook the house. And I jumped up and went running her way, and she met me about halfway up the hallway. And I thought a vehicle had run off the road out front and literally struck either the deck or come over the deck and hit the front of the house. I was expecting to have a Chevy sticking through the front wall of the house. And we both, did you hear that? What was that? And I remember looking at her and saying, well, that wasn't an acorn. And that particular time, it had been raining during that period. I went out the next day and walked around back, just looking. And they were some impressions, not real clear prints, what you could definitely say were Sasquatch prints, but they were some big impressions that could have been. And then I happened to glance up at the siding on the back of the house about the living room. And there was a big smear of mud that started above the living room window there and just arced upwards up under the rain trough, leak trough, as we call it, gutter, whatever you want to call it, and trailed down the siding on the side of the house to the corner of the house. Now, the way the yard is, there's a slight pitch under that window. I'm 5'7". If I stand under that window and reach up, my fingertips barely brush the bottom sill of the window. And the window itself is probably 2.5, 3 foot in height. And this smear of mud down the siding on the house was above the top of the window, basically right under the gutter, running in an arc. If you can see my hand kind of like that, up and then back down. I would judge this smear of mud to be a good at least 11 foot off the ground. And then I was like, well, now I know where that god awful thud thump come from last night. And that happened 2 or 3 more occasions. And eventually, after going to the conferences when Crypticog come to Frankfurt and listening, we found out that lights were, and I got some trail cameras to put out. And at one point, I had the trail cameras literally around the house on the yard, facing out towards the fence and wood line, and that seemed to back them off. The knocks stopped, or didn't stop, but you'd hear them on down in the field in the woods. The house didn't get slapped no more. After we put the cameras and lights out there. Now, we still got the solar powered lights around the yard and the house, and so far it's worked. But every now and then I'll go out and I'll find the solar powered lights in the yard are those that are about, I always forget where the camera's at. They're about that tall. They got a hard plastic stake on them about that long that you drive down in the ground and angle the light however you want it. And then they got the little cord that attaches them to a solar panel collector. It's the same thing, got the little stake. And it's not impossible to drive them in and pull them out of the ground. Obviously, I do it, and I'm not superhuman strong. But you actually have to lift up, pull to pull them out of the ground. And several times I've been going around checking them, and one of them on one end of the yard or one end of the house, sometimes 2 of them will either be completely pulled out and laid on their side, either the light and or the little solar collector, or they're pushed over where the solar collector won't get any sunlight and the light won't work. And everybody says, well, you know, a cat or a dog or a raccoon or possum. Well, them lights have been out there for a long time, and so are the cats, dogs, raccoons, possums, so forth, what forth, and on. Nothing ever bothered. And that'll tie into something we'll tell you about here a little bit later. But that was what really got me to thinking and starting to connect dots was the house getting slapped. And I honestly believe I can't find any other logic. And after I finally kind of come to terms with the fact it might be a Sasquatch, I realized if it was walnuts falling out of the tree and hitting the roof, I'd be hearing it all the time, day and night, every time the wind blew. And you know, heard it wasn't happening every night or every week, just occasionally. So that kind of shot the walnut theory. And I mean, even the soft thumps, as we called them, this wasn't a squirrel or a rabbit or whatever getting on the roof and prancing around. This was something hard and heavy. And now thinking back, I wonder if they wasn't throwing walnuts at the house and hitting the side of the house with them. Or it could have been tree knocks on down in the field and woods there, you know, them doing, we call them tree knocks. We don't know if they're tree knocks, rock knocks, they're clapping their hands, stomping their feet, beating their chest, whatever to make that sound. But it just dawned on me that, you know, this was not walnuts. And I'm trying to think chronologically what happened next. I think I had my first partial sighting. I was walking around the yard one afternoon late, right around sundown, and that's after I'd pretty much come to the conclusion of what we were dealing with. Still wasn't sure, but I was getting more and more convinced. We'd been to the first Crypticon talk, and Well, this happened before we went to Crypticon, I think. I can't remember exactly. It's been 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, I was walking along the fence line, just out wandering around in the yard, wasn't really doing anything. And across the fence, downhill from me, probably about 30 or 40 yards. And this, I remember this was in late spring, early summer, because the foliage and undergrowth and everything else was real heavy at the time. Something kind of huffed, just a and it wasn't really a huff like a deer would do. I've always said it almost sounded like another researcher said. Have you ever heard an older man when they get aggravated or disgusted with something, they'll just hoof at clearing their throat or huffing or whatever you want to call it. And something pretty good size took off down through the foliage and brush and trees there. And I'm just sitting there stunned because whatever it was, maybe 30, 40 yards from me, and I didn't have a clue until it made a sound and started moving. And all I could see were through the foliage and leaves and underbrush that time of year was flashes. Now I'm standing on an uphill slope from it, and these flashes are still eye level or higher with me, even though it's at a lower elevation. And this thing is moving pretty quick clip, and it kind of ran at a downhill slant and curved around into a little gully down there on the downside of the farm where it connects with another neighbor's farm into a little copse of trees until I lost sight of it. And even after the whole time, and even after I lost sight of it, I could hear it crashing down through there. You could hear limbs and twigs snapping. It sounded like a bulldozer going down through there. And these flashes I saw, I judged them to be around 8 foot off the ground, and they were what I called a mahogany, reddish brown color, what I could make out. And I just got the impression of whatever it was huge, quite a bit bigger than me, and on two legs. Just the way the flashes moved, the motion, the only way I can describe it, it looked like something moving on two. And it might have been my brain filling in the details after the fact, but it almost seemed like I was making out either pump or swing. So I didn't get a real good look at it that time either. But what I went out the next day, went down into the field in the woods there, and I found the path where it had smashed down through there all the way to the property line. And I mean, there was branches and limbs broke, snap, a good 8, 9, maybe 10 foot off the ground, and some of them as thick as my arm or thicker. And I've got pretty good sized forearms on me. And the underbrush was just smashed flat. And like I said, it was real green. You couldn't really make out any prints or impressions. There was too much undergrowth, just flat. And like I said, just like it sounded, it looked like a bulldozer went down through there. I mean, this pathway it smashed down through there. A deer, will leave a trail a couple of feet wide, but this was probably 4 or 5 feet wide. And deers don't cause that kind of wreckage when they move. I've never really seen a deer run that far in a straight line without zigging or zagging or jumping or something or stopping and starting. And this was just one continuous dash. So that happened, and I was like, all right, I'm getting pretty convinced. And I remember standing there watching it crash down through there. And finally, my common sense kicked in. I didn't have so much as a toothpick to defend myself. I said, what are you going to do if it comes back? So that's about the time I decided it was time to go inside. I told Mom about it. She tried to convince me, oh, it was a deer. Everybody I talked to, well, it could have been a bear. Well, once again, we have black bear in Kentucky. Not usually in this area, but they're black bear. And this wasn't even remotely close to black. It was, like I said, a dark reddish brown mahogany color, what I could make out. And I think after that, the next thing happened. Are you falling asleep on me, all right? And you probably remember this too. It was one of the nights. The Crypticon was a 2 night event. I think it was the second one we went to. Maybe the third one. The first one, it was in Lexington, Kentucky. We got home that night and we just put our stuff down and got back in the house. This was before we had both of us. And we heard as clear as day, the living room window, 3 or 4 taps, just like somebody took my finger and tapped on this desk, tapping on that window. Mom ran and locked the kitchen door we just come through. And I'm ashamed to admit it, but I kind of froze up, and something just told me you are not ready for what you're going to see if you go over there and look out that window right now. And I just kind of froze. And it did it again a second time. Do you remember that? Well, speak. They can't hear you nod your head.
Yeah.
Is that about how you remember that happening? And like I said, that might have just been the shock of it all, just not expecting to hear that tapping noise. And there might be a rational explanation, but that's another window. It's a good, I'd say, well, it's the window the air conditioner's in. It's got to be a good 6.5, 7 foot off the ground. Well, they can stand on the old sister top. They still have to be close to 6 foot to reach up and tap on that window. Well, because the air conditioner's in the way, Mom. You'd have to reach over the air conditioner. Yeah, but part of it's under the ground too.
No, that's the top of it.
Anyway, you'd have to be 6 foot or better to reach over the air conditioner and tap on the window. And this is at, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So the odds of somebody out there running up and tapping on the window, this is rural Kentucky. That's not a good idea. Some people will shoot through the windows. So we never did figure that out. And that really kind of freaked me out because it was almost like it was meant to get my attention or freak me out. Just on the window. Trying to think what would have been the next thing that happened around here.
I don't know.
Probably me over by the pond, I guess.
I don't know.
I was over by the pond one afternoon. I'd been out in the woods doing, and when I say pond, it's got a hole in it. It barely holds water anymore. It's not much more than a glorified mud puddle at this point. It might have 2 foot of water in it on a good day. But anyway, and it's probably 10 or 15 foot wide and maybe 10 foot long. We used to use it to water the ponies when we had them on the property. But I had just come up out of the tree line, was making my way up the embankment there next to the pond. And once again, I was going around the left-hand side of the pond on the higher ground. And it was just right around sundown, starting to get dusky, kind of dark, shadowy. And I heard the same thing again, that hoof, hoof. And I looked over across the pond through the trees around it. And I saw, now this looked more, it could have been the lighting. Next to a tree, what looked like a black figure took off back down the bank there, back down into the hollow. And once again, it was booking, it was moving. And I could clearly see this looked like it was running on 2 feet. Now, this one didn't look as big to me, the black figure. It looked closer to about 7 foot, maybe 7.5. Whereas what I saw in the trees the first time, the reddish brown one, like I said, I was thinking was more around 8, maybe 9. 8 or better. And this one looked right around 7 foot to me. So it went crashing down through there, same thing. And I just stood there kind of stunned and watched it go. What else are you going to do? And I had another occurrence more or less right there in the same area where I'd just come back from doing whoops and calls and tree knocks. It just cleared the tree line there, and I was taping this time. And as I'm walking back up the embankment there, you hear, to me, what sounds clearly like a good-sized branch or limb being not stepped on, but just snap. And that's all you hear. No footsteps, nothing. Just sounds like somebody took a good-sized chunk of wood and snapped it in two. And I kind of stood there a minute and slowly looked over my shoulder, and I couldn't see anything that time. And it was about the same time of day, right around sundown. And we've had all kinds of knocks, whoops, whistles. Both of us, we've had him for about a year, going on a year and a half now. And there's been several occasions here at night in the house where he'll go just ballistic, barking, growling, howling, carrying on, looking at the doors and windows. And he's done it a couple of times in broad daylight, but mostly at night. You look out, you can't see nothing, hear nothing, smell nothing. And
That one time we smelled that, and I thought it was a skunk.
Well, one time you did smell something you thought skunk like. But usually it's no odor, no sound, we don't see, hear anything. But Bocephus does. And he did that the day we got whistled at. He wanted to go towards that tree line or whatever it was, and I wouldn't let him. And speaking of smells, the only time we've really noticed any odor other than that I can think of is the one couple summers ago. We actually called the volunteer fire department down here, thought we had a gas leak because there was stench outside more so than in the house. This smelled like something between a mix between natural gas and something rotting. And at first we thought that's what it was. There's an animal dead down in the woods somewhere. Couldn't find anything. Wasn't no buzzard circling. And the fire department come down here and they smelt it, but they couldn't locate the source of it either. And they noticed that the source seemed to move because one of the firefighters walked from the yard up the road probably 60, 80 yards and said at first he smelt it closer to the house and it stopped. And then he smelt it further up there where he was standing, like it was down over the bank.
Up towards that curve where
Yeah, he went up the road the same direction she had her two sightings. And it was a god awful stench, whatever it was. She must have to take a potty break or something. We've had viewers. We haven't had any questions that I see, unless for some reason comments ain't making it through again or something. Not seeing anything. Still got one viewer. If you can, leave a comment just to let us know they're working. Or somebody send me something on Messenger and let me know they ain't. I'm waiting on her to come back. I guess I'll say something while I'm waiting on her to come back. I think that about covers it for our experiences around the farm here. Like I said, we've had multiple knocks. Now, we're not some of those people that claim habituation where they report that the Sasquatch live right on their property and they interact with them literally daily. Sometimes we'll go weeks, even months, and not hear or see anything. Not so much as a knock, a whoop, a whistle, no smells. But, and I can't. And we have a couple periods there where it wasn't just the Sasquatch that seemed to go away. Everything went away. Deer, squirrel. Well, when you see a squirrel every now and then, but rabbits, raccoons, possums, deers. That's one thing I left out, the coyotes. It was a summer night about 3 summers ago. I was sitting out on the deck late one night, and we used to have a pretty good sized coyote pack that ran a ravine off to the west here. They were down in there braying one night, and all of a sudden you just heard something else mixed in with them, something big. Between a scream and a howl and a roar, pretty much the classic Sasquatch. And as this went on over a few minutes, you hear fewer and fewer coyotes. They started screaming like something was tearing them apart. I told Mom, I said, them coyotes done got a hold of something they can't handle. And it sounded like like I said, like it was a pretty good number of them at first. And there was just fewer and fewer and fewer coyotes yelling and yipping. And finally, there was no coyotes yowling and yipping. And then you heard that one, and that was it. And since that time, in the last 2 or 3 years, I can count the coyotes I've even heard on one hand around here. They're just gone. Something, it seems like, has, if not completely, almost totally wiped the coyote population out in this area. And from what I understand, coyotes are pretty, once they get established in an area, it's hard to get rid of them, even by humans hunting them. It's pretty hard. I ain't gonna say they breed like rabbits, but probably pretty close. Then they mix in with feral dogs, coy dogs, and the population just usually explodes, and you have trouble getting rid of them. Because there for a while, this part of the country was just ate up with them. Farmers were paying people to hunt them. And same thing with deer. At one point, north central Kentucky, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a deer, especially in a vehicle. But we had about a 6 month period there where we didn't see a single deer. That's happened a couple times now where you go anywhere 3, 4, 6 months and hardly see it. I mean, it seemed like you didn't see as many birds or buzzards as you should. Just no wildlife whatsoever, which is really.
Before we had all kinds of deers.
Yeah, that's what I say. Before, like I said, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a deer, and they started to come back. I've been getting them on the trail cams again, and it's just strange. Somebody tried to blame it on that disease the deer had here a year or so ago, but it seemed even strange for that. The, I forget what that disease called and killed some deer.
You forget about us hearing that screaming and squealing in summer. We thought it was a woman or a kid.
Yeah, I did forget about that. We had 1 or 2 afternoons right around sundown, dusk. You want to tell them? I'm doing all the talking. You want to tell them this part?
Back in the summer, we was sitting outside, or I was sitting outside out there at both Stevens, and he heard it too. I mean, I could tell the way he actually barked. And Barry was in the house taking a bath, I think, and I heard something scream, sound like a kid or a woman scream. And I sat there a minute and I heard it again, and I thought, that's somebody hollering, screaming. So I run in here and hollered for him. I said, Barry, I hear a kid or a woman somewhere back in there screaming. I said, I said, reckon they need help or something. Of course, by the time he got out there, we didn't hear it for a while. Then we did hear it. And then there was another time in the morning. Remember, most of us was out there, and it was in the morning. I will say about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And well, I guess Barry was still in bed. I don't know where he was at.
No, I was doing something. I wasn't asleep. Because you hollered at me, and I ran outside just as quick as you hollered.
I heard it a couple times more, and it sounded like somebody screaming, a woman or a child screaming out. We thought somebody heard her hollering for help. We called all the neighbors and everything, and they said they were okay. We never could figure out what it was.
And the time I heard it, or the times, I think I've heard that twice. Everybody talks about how a bobcat, sounds just like a woman being murdered. And we have had people catch bobcats or they call them lynxes, some of them. I'm not real sure what the difference between the two is, maybe size. I've heard that. This is different. This is louder, just off. It's just like what I call the 60-pound dove I hear sometimes. It's something that the ooh, coo. But it's deep and loud than any dove I've ever. And I always joke if it's a dove, it weighs 60 pounds, it's riding in my back pocket. Same way with this scream, it sounded fairly human and just loud and long. And we've heard other odd noises we can't explain. I told the last person on episode, I heard one what I called Geronimo on a warpath down in the woods there. I mean, it sounded just. And I know for a fact, it's our property. If there's nobody down there, I can look down there. There's nothing moving, nobody around but me. Mom's in the house. And I always said, I expected Geronimo in full war paint to ride up out of the woods on a pony and go on the warpath. That's the only thing I can describe that to. That was and it was way too loud to be a bird. Or I know foxes make strange noises, coyotes, but it didn't sound like any of those. I realize there's a lot of animals make a lot of strange noises, but this was really weird. And then I had the one friend that listened to one of my audios when I recorded one night what sounded like possible Bigfoot calls and coyotes in the distance. This was before the pack sounded like it got slaughtered. He said he heard with headphones what sounded almost like a melody, like somebody singing, which I don't know what to make of that. I know there's nobody out there dead of night out in the middle of the woods singing, but he thought it sounded like a woman humming or singing. And I was out in the woods one day, speaking of odd noises, and I've never been able to explain this. I heard distinctly two short bursts of what sounded like Native American or Celtic flute music. Once again, I'm down in the woods there. I'm the only one around. I'm not playing a flute. I don't know how to play the flute. And it had a melody to it. And everybody said it was some kind of bird, but birds don't whistle and chirp. That literally sounds like, Celtic, Irish, or Native American folk dance music, flute music. And that was really weird. I think, like I said, knocks and stuff, we hear them from time to time. I'd say almost once a week, usually, other than the couple of dead periods we had where we just didn't hear or see anything.
You usually hear them more than I do because I don't stay up late like you do.
Yeah. Well, we've heard the knocks in broad daylight too. I've got one video when I was down there squatching, looking for tracks and doing knocks and whoops where it almost sounded like me and it was knocking backwards and forwards each other. And that was in broad daylight. But trying to think if we think that just about covers everything for us, don't it? Personally.
I guess about the only thing I think of. I can't think of anything else.
And we had a couple times everybody talks about sometimes people see lights, orbs, whatever you want to call them with Bigfoot. We've had once or twice we saw it. Now the ones that were in my trail cam photos, I think I figured that out. I believe somebody has put a either RV or some kind of small utility building out there on the far ridge. I looked with binoculars. It looked like there was something sitting there. Whatever it was wasn't very large. You couldn't really make it out. Well, one night I was driving home from getting groceries or something. And I saw an RV sitting in a yard or a field somewhere alongside the road. And it just dawned on me that the lights off it, not the headlights, but like the lights coming through the windows on it, look kind of like those lights in my trail cam photo. So I think somebody's either got an RV that's not always there. Maybe they move it during the day, drive it. I don't know. Or it could be, like I said, some kind of small shed utility. Or who knows, maybe the kids go out there in the night. Because those lights seem like they only showed up in like a wee morning hours in the pictures. Maybe it's somebody in a tent or something. Whatever they are, they're not there all the time. But I think there's some kind of natural explanation for them. Either an RV, some kind of small building with lights on it. It's hard to see even with binoculars from that distance. Or maybe somebody like us got solar powered lights out in their yard or field that only on a timer or something. Could be. But one night we saw a bobbing orangish yellow. You remember this? Over through the field up behind the barn over there. The night we called the police on it, called the sheriff's department. And at first, when I was watching it out the window, and at first I thought it was a helicopter or an airplane just because it's moving. Then I realized it was below treetop level, and it was coming up out of the holler onto our property, up the hillside, and kind of cut sideways, went over towards the barn, and it was bobbing just a little bit, and it was about the size of maybe between a softball, wiffle ball. Probably wasn't quite as big as a basketball, but there wasn't any sound. At first, I thought that's somebody on a four wheeler or a side by side or a mule or something like that. And really, where it come up out of that holler, the trees are so close together up there. The only two ways you can go back through there after a certain point's on foot or horseback. You can't get a, I don't know if you can get a dirt bike through in places. So we saw that, and we, like I said, we called the sheriff's department out here that night, thought we had an intruder on the property. Because the more I thought about it, I said, it kind of reminded me of an old coal miner's headlamp, or the ones, the kind coon hunters use. The sheriff's department, they sent two deputies out. They searched the field, back around behind the barn, inside it. Nothing, no prints, nothing. They went up and down the road looking maybe if somebody parked a vehicle and come in on foot. Never could find anything. And every now and then you'll see a light way back in the woods or something that, there's no houses down in there. No reason for a light to be there. It's like I told everybody, I believe everybody seen a UFO because every now and then there's one that, oh, mom says she's never seen a UFO. But every now and then I'll watch an orangish, goldish light go over out here. Whatever it is, moves pretty quick, but doesn't make a sound. Just a goldish, yellow, orangish glow in the sky, which there's probably a rational explanation for it. I just don't know what it is. And other than that, I think that's about it with lights around here. We won't see anything with any regularity. Nowhere near as regular as the whistles or knocks or whoops. So that's about it for our own personal, modern, recent experiences. We thought we'd go back and talk about some of the things that happened over the years, long before we considered maybe we had Sasquatch in the area. And once again, they're not just on our property, they're in the area. There's hollers and bridges and stuff around us that go on for miles and miles and miles. Some of them, there probably hadn't been a human being in them in 50 years or better.
I've been here 55.
Mom's been here 55, and I mean, for one, the big holler down behind us goes off to the east, runs all the way down to the next small little community, and there's absolutely nothing back through there. Around here, most houses are built right up real close to the road. You'll have one every now and then it's way back in a field or way back in the woods, but for the most part, most people, you walk down their backyard just like ours, and 40 or 50 foot from the back of the house, you're in the woods. You might cross a small field and then you're in the woods. And that particular direction, there's just absolutely nothing back through there. And one thing that always stuck in my mind after I come to the conclusion, connected the dots, so to speak, of what we were dealing with. Mom, you had a old cast iron frying pan that the handle come out of that you used to put cat food in for the farm cats. I'll put quotation marks around farm cats because you supposedly let farm cats feed themselves off the vermin and rodents. You don't feed them, but Softy over here can't stand the thought of anything going hungry, so she would feed the farm cats, still does. And that frying pan laid out there for how long? Nothing ever bothered it.
Several years.
Never budged more than a foot or two in one direction or the other. And this is one of those old cast iron frying pan. I always forget how to get my hands in front of the camera. This thing was probably that big around and probably weighed 3-4 pounds. You could use it for a weapon if an intruder broke in the house, hide behind the refrigerator, smack them over the head with it, knock them out. One morning you go out, this old frying pan's just gone. Nowhere in the yard, looking over the fence, because my first thought was raccoons or something got a hold of it, or a possum drug it down. But it was big enough you couldn't get it through the fence with any kind of ease. You couldn't get it over the fence with any kind of ease with the weight to it. Just gone. And I've been all over this property ever since. I've never found that frying pan. And like I said, if it was the cats or the raccoons or the possums or the dogs or whatever that drug it off, why did it take them years to drag it off? So that's just one little odd thing. You want to tell them about what Papa saw on another property that looking back, that you knew then what you know now?
We lived on another property, and my dad was coming down the hill he'd been up there at grub hole and
speak up a little bit.
Looked back and he said there was a man running across the top of the ridge there. good sized man. He said he was very big, had long arms, kind of hurry like. And of course, Dad didn't realize what it was back then. People never thought about nothing like that. That's like I've been all over this country. Been here 55 years, just take pony ride all over this country. I had no idea on such things as Bigfoot. Not that I might have rode right by one, didn't even know it.
You wouldn't be the first.
I mean, but he did see something running across the top of the ridge, and he said he was a great big man. So I'm assuming from what he said and described, it was probably Bigfoot.
And just to point out, did he only see that once, or did he see him on more than one?
He only said something about it that one time. He might have seen it more, but he just said something about that one time.
Well, I was just wondering, and just to point out, the property she's talking about, it's even more remote. Well, I'm not going to say remote or secluded, but this area is rural, and the area she's talking about is even more rural than where we're at now. This ridge line, this large man would be running from nowhere to nowhere around sundown. There's just nothing out there. Woods, hollers, ridges. Arkansas boys hunting and fishing. We had 21 dogs disappear in our area in the last 2 months. This is a 10-mile area, and here, let me put it on screen for everybody. Check to see what may have happened to him. In the same area, we have noticed that, and it cuts off, I guess. We never had any dogs disappear that I know of. Y'all ever me?
I don't remember no dogs disappearing, but that one year I had 22 cats, and by the time fall come around, didn't have any.
I don't remember all 22 of them. I remember I was going to mention that we had a couple kittens we found right out in front of the house in the morning time. The best I could tell, and they wasn't big cats at all, and I realized, I may be connecting dots that ain't there to connect. But in these two particular, there's two or three of them, I can't remember for sure. It looked like their necks had been snapped. There wasn't any mark on them as far as a tear, a bite, a claw mark, nothing. And they was just dead. And only thing I could figure out is their neck had been snapped or they'd been dropped or slammed so hard against the ground it just killed them. I remember that. That was been a couple of years back. Then we had the one old Tom farm cat that something got a hold of him and almost tore his head off. I mean, he had a gash, still got it. It's never completely healed. 2 or 3 years. Run right along behind his ear and down the side of his neck. If it'd been any deeper or any longer, he would have died. This is a pretty good size, semi-feral farm cat. And I realize that don't have to be Bigfoot, a possum, or a raccoon, or coyote, but the two or three kittens that showed up dead, laying, and each one we found was in 5 foot of one another, right? Like something wanted us to find them. Like I said, they didn't have a mark on them, but I could see. I couldn't really be sure their necks were broke, but that was just weird. One of those weird things. And we used to have an Alaskan mix. He was part wolf, part Alaskan husky. We called Snowball, and he had two distinctive barks. One was barking at a coyote or a coon or possum or whatever, but he had another whine bark howl he would do when people come around. And it used to be he would stand and stare down at the tree line back in the bottom of the hill towards the old hollers and do that like he was looking at somebody. And usually right around dusk or at night, we'd hear him doing it, and he only made that noise for people. And once again, we're out in the middle of nowhere, I wouldn't think there'd be anybody out there wandering around without a light at night. But he always stared and acted like he saw something, that real nervous, weird whine cry. I remember Snowball doing that. But we haven't had massive animal disappearances like that, 21 dogs. Which, according to reports there, I mean, Bigfoot and dogs don't get along. And I always heard, a dog that's never tangled with a Bigfoot might try it. But if one's seen one and experienced it and survived the tell about it, they'll never do it a second time, which is what worries me about both of us. Like that day when I got whistled at, hey, you might not know what you're charging there, trying to get us both killed. And I finally drug him back to the house before I went back out there. And did you want to tell them about your friend that ain't in the exact same area as us, but as the crow flies, she probably ain't, her and her family probably wasn't 30 miles from us.
I had a friend that her and her family lived in this area, and they lived way back up a holler.
Speak up a little bit.
In an old house. And her daddy seen one cross the road up from the house, and he told told his wife and them that he'd seen it. And she said that her mom and dad went to town, and her and her sister was home. And that thing come around, she said they run upstairs and hid under the bed till their mom and dad come back, said they was scared to death. And said it stunk. It's like they could smell it. And she said it really scared them. And then she said the neighbor man that lived there close to him, they seen him go back in the field to cut hay or something. They worried about him, afraid to do something to him and things. And then she said one day they was there, her mother was cleaning or something, and she got smelling something. And she told us, I believe that cat's got back under the bed and done its business. She got down on her hands and knees, was looking back under the bed, turned around, looked back at the window, and she said the Bigfoot was standing there looking in the window at her backside.
Did her mom, did she ever say if her mom or daddy the one described it at all, what it looked like?
She said it was big.
Just big. There's the rest of the Arkansas boys hunting and fishing. Said most of the deer left this area and we had Bigfoot activity in the same area. Just wondering if y'all had any pets go missing. Not recently. Those two small cats, that was a year or two ago. And how many years has it been since you had that summer where you lost 22 over the course of a summer?
It's been 10 years.
10 years or so ago. That's like we said, we think, possibly we've had Sasquatch in this area around the farm for a lot longer than we've realized with all the weird things we can think back that happened. I'm trying to think. You was telling them about your friends and her family's experience, the one looking in the window and seeing it outside and stuff. When I was a real young child, this is when I was riding the school bus, elementary school. Our school bus, the bus picked me up sometimes before daylight during spring and summer. I'm talking what, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning?
You got on the bus about 7 o'clock.
About 7. And we went down. Well, the people that know me know where Robinson and Barry's at. I ain't giving away no exact location. This has been all them years ago. And went down around Robinson and Barry, and all the way down through there is river bottoms and fields. People plant tobacco, hay, corn. I remember one year I couldn't have been more than maybe second, third, fourth grade. I was still in elementary school. Along came what they call, eventually become known as the river haint. And Jim Ed Hill, if he was here, could tell this story better than I can because he remembers it better than me. I think either him or somebody's family might have even seen him or it one time. But basically, in that area around Robinson, Barry, and down towards uh, not Morgan. What's that other little community out there? If you leave Robinson and go back towards town, Robinson something or another road runs between them. Anyway, that whole little bit of area had river bottoms, and I'm having a mind blank. I've drove that road 100 times delivering. And I'm sure anybody from the local area knows basically what I'm talking about. The dams down there, and
Robertson.
not Robertson, not Morgan, not Alexandria, not Porter, not Sunrise. Poindexter. Lord, took me long enough. Poindexter. Robinson Poindexter Road and all down there. There's big river bottoms. The river runs back through there. People started reporting seeing this figure, and at first, back then they called it a man. Said usually was seen right around dusk or during the night, sometimes real early in the morning. Everybody said it looked like a real big, great big man in a heavy black jacket or something, walking alongside the roads or in the fields. When a car come along or somebody stopped, try to put the lights on him or anything, he'd take off across those fields and river bottoms, run back down towards the river. And I always talk about how big this guy was. It looked like he was dressed in solid black, great big black jacket. He was real big and he could really move. He could really move. Nobody could ever catch up with him if they try to follow him in a car, truck, or tractor, or whatever. He'd always get away. Well, if I knew then what I know now, they were very basic Sasquatch, huge, tall, big, solid black, looked like he was wearing a fur coat. And I wonder, once again, I might be connecting dots that ain't there to connect, but I wonder, knowing now what I knew then, or knowing then what I know now, were they really seeing a man? And they eventually called it the river hang. And that went on for the better part of a spring and summer school year. I think even up through summer and then fall, the next school session, when we went back to school, people were still seeing it every now and then. And I remember, I believe they had some animal mutilations, either cattle or horses down in that area around that time in the early to mid 80s. I think some people had either some cows or horses got tore up down in there somewhere. So I remember that. That's in this local area. I mean, anybody that watches this knows me, knows I'm in Harrison County. I'm not giving away any specific locations or people or addresses, just general area. When I say Robbins and Berry, like I said, if you're from here, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, it don't matter. But yeah, that happened. As far as missing animals or animal mutilations, I remember some cattle or horses. Like I said, they supposedly them and dogs do not get along. And then from what I've experienced, I would say them and coyotes don't get along as well as everybody seems to think they do. At least not around here. I'm trying to think if there's any other little odd stories from the area. I know over, like I said, no, just general area. Robertson County, and this has been years and years ago, they found some prints along the Licking River there somewhere. And they actually had some kind of, I don't know if he was a game warden or some kind of wildlife expert come out and look at the prints and they couldn't identify them. Everybody thought that was a Sasquatch prints, and that's been back in probably 90s, early 2000s. Then about that same time, they had a young girl that broke down over on a road somewhere in Robertson County. And she started walking, and this was in the dead of night. I'm up in the AM hours from what I remember of the story. And she noticed something following her, and she claimed it was big and on two legs. Started chasing her. She finally found a house and ran up in the driveway, and people's dogs come out and started chasing whatever was chasing her and ran it off. And the people come out, and all I could see was a dark figure running away. He looked right big, real big on its hind legs, and people always wondered about that. Basically, just they said if it was a man, it was a big man. And the dogs kind of turned tail after they got out there to hoot or whatever it was and turned around and come back to the house. It scared the poor girl half to death one time. And in the course of, since I really got into investigating and whatnot, I've had two or three other people. I had one, this is back there on the eastern side of Harrison County, up around the Roberts and Nicholas County corner there, where they all kind of come together. Or not Nicholas County, Roberts County line. Some friends, a co-worker actually, told me that him and some friends were out in the field having a little bonfire with some girls one summer night. They looked up the hillside and there was a ridge line at the top of the hill. They saw these two big green eyes looking back at them. And the way he described it, and I always got to remember to get my hands in front of the camera here. He said these eyes were big as 50-cent pieces, bright green, staring right at him. And he said then it took off running. And as it was running along that ridge, along that hilltop, the eyes stayed facing them, but it was like if I'm looking towards the camera, it was running this way while looking this way. And he said they had to be a good 10 foot off the ground. He said the eyes were probably a foot apart or better. And the only thing I could think of would be something flying. I said, you sure it wasn't a big cat up in a tree or something flying? That was the only two things I could come up with. He said, we could hear it running. And he said, there wasn't no trees or nothing up there on top of that hill, along that hilltop, down that ridge into the wood line. He said it was pretty wide open and just tall weeds. He said, this, whatever there was, they two big green eyes about 10 foot off the ground that looked at them the whole time it was full on running the other direction, which I dare anybody to go out in the field and try to look one way and take off running full blast to see how far you get without watching where you're going before you, if not flat fall on your face, stumble. Which they said they never. I found that interesting. And there's another guy I talked to online, same general area along the river there, right around the Harrison or Robertson line. Talked about back in along the river where the cliffs were at. He heard a lot of vocalizations that he couldn't identify, howls and whoops and stuff. And there was one more from that general area, well, two more actually. One guy told me he had something shook their tent one night. And then there was another lady that contacted me and told a story on a Facebook group, said that her brother saw a large brownish creature standing in the tobacco field one day. And she said it took him years to get over it. He said he ran in the house and and it was all, she said for weeks it was all you could do to get him to leave the house. And she said even years later he wouldn't be outside by himself without a firearm, especially at night. He said, my brother was fairly brave, but whatever this was scared him half to death. And then I think several years later, one of their cousins saw essentially the same creature from the description, 7, 8 foot tall, brownish red, standing, if not in the same field, real close, same general area on their property. Scared the tar out of the cousin who was a female this time. And she just remarked on how frightened her brother was by what he saw. And of course, our local area, I know a lot of the Bigfoot books and David Pilates with these missing 411 talks about areas with the name Devil in them, where anybody from this area knows about Devil's Backbone. I've never been out there personally, never want to go. But that area's got a reputation, for everything being haunted. There was devil worshipable cults and caves out there. People seen UFOs out there, Bigfoot, other things they couldn't even describe as Bigfoot. I mean, you name it. I think I've heard a story about it out there. But two that stand out in my mind. When I was in high school, there was a few older folks hung around us, a CB club. And one was a biker. He had a car too that he had a CB in, but he was a biker. And this guy's nickname was Psycho. I ain't gonna say his real name. I don't know, somebody might figure out who I'm talking about just from Psycho. I'm sure there's more than one guy with the nickname Psycho. And this was back when I was in high school, so I'm sure, over the years, there's plenty of them. And another one we call Crazy Lady. They went out there there's an old cemetery out there on Devil's Backbone. And both these, people wasn't afraid of the devil themselves. They lived up to their CB handle nicknames. And Crazy Lady said something with red eyes was perched on top of the cemetery gate looking at him. Psycho claimed whatever it was standing behind the cemetery gate looking over it. And, your basic cemetery gate is going to be probably 7 or 8 foot high. He said these red eyes were looking over the gate at him. And he swore he'd never go back out there with a gun to his head. And two guys I played football with, and these were big, rough, tough guys too. They went out there with some friends one night, and they never would go into a whole lot of detail about what they saw, what they heard, what happened. But same thing, both these guys are 6 foot plus and probably pushing 300 pounds at 250 at least. Seniors, juniors in high school. And same thing, they come back one night from out there just scared stiff. I swore they'd never go back out there again. You not with a gun to my head. Well, I'll ever go around Devil's Back. So I have no desire to ever go out there. I wouldn't care if Bigfoot's out there, and it's a large area. I mean, Devil's Backbone, depending on who you ask, where it's at, exactly what where Devil's Backbone is, it covers a pretty good hunk of ground out there. But like I said, Sasquatch could be out there doing jumping jacks in the field in broad daylight, waiting on somebody to come along and take a picture. I ain't gonna be the one to take the picture. I ain't going. As far as local stuff, I checked the BFRO website not too long ago, and I think there was one report of Harrison County back in the maybe early 90s, but it was of like a smaller creature. The guy describes it being almost kangaroo like that he saw somewhere, and it didn't give a whole lot of detail, or I can't remember. I don't think there's a whole lot of reports or any for Harrison County on the Kentucky BFRO last time I checked. And the only other one I can think off the top of my head is when I was delivering, I went out a rural country road with this one older gentleman, and he saw some of the decals I got on my truck. And he said, I'm not going to tell you it's what I saw, but every so often he pointed a ridge off in the distance, another ridge story. He said, I see a family right around sundown walking across that ridge. He said, there's three of them. And he said, I take it to be a father, mother, and juvenile. He said, they're all pretty good size. He said, but the daddy is a big sucker. That's just how he put it, a big sucker. He said, I could see him, backlit with the sun behind him. And it was to the west, the ridge, or maybe the southwest. He said, I could see him walking along that ridge every now and then, right around sundown. He said, first he said, there's an Amish family that lives nearby, and I thought it was them. But he said, I got to thinking. He said, I don't believe even the Amish guy's that big. He's a good sized fella, but he ain't that big, is how he put it. He said, and they'll come out of the tree line, rock along the ridge. He said, sometimes I'll see them going the other direction along the ridge. Usually either right around sundown or sun up. He was an old farmer type guy, so. And well, you never know. I just hard to say without being able to get up there and examine and see if you find any prints or anything. It's private property. He said, yeah. He said, oh, he said, seeing them stickers on your truck kind of reminded me of it. Yeah. And as I was driving back down his driveway, I was looking over at the ridge where he's pointing, and it dawned on me. This ridge had to be, I'm going to say, at the very least, a quarter of a mile away. And, he was describing, especially the bigger one of these three figures, how big it looked walking along that ridge. It would have to be a real good sized feller to look that big from that distance. Because I realize, on a ridge outline with the sun to your back, the light to your back might help, but you still wouldn't look. And he just said, he's a great big sucker. How he described him. He didn't try to give any measurements or weight or nothing like that. But he said he saw that a few times. I think that about runs through it for local experiences and reports we've gotten, our own personal experience and reports. Anybody got any more questions or anything other than about the missing animals there from the Arkansas boys? Or
You didn't tell them what Kenny said.
Oh yeah, you're right. I see you blurted out a name. Man, we got one neighbor when I first started getting into this. He's a very respected individual in his early mid-70s. Very professional, had a profession, was held in pretty high esteem. And when I first started getting into this, he said, down there in that holler, sometimes you hear some odd noises come out of there. And I said, yeah. And A little bit later on, he was, sometimes you think you see something out of the corner of your eyes. He would talk. Sometimes you see something, think you see something move out of the corner of your eyes down there. Like, yeah, 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 I know what you're talking about.
He didn't want you to go down.
And then eventually he come up with he'd seen a pack of feral dogs. Well, that didn't scare me off. And just every time he saw me headed down in there, you be careful down in there. You watch your back. Be careful. Be real careful. And he just didn't want me going down in there. And he never would come right out and say what he'd seen or heard. And it was just real odd the way he kept trying to kind of scare me out of that. And he told me I could go down in and even go over onto his property if he wanted. But you be real careful. You watch yourself. You take care of it. It was just because he's not the kind of guy to do something, try to scare you. And if you didn't want me down there, just tell me you don't want me on your property. And he would if he didn't want. He's the type if he didn't want me on his property, he'd tell me to stay off his property. He wasn't doing it trying to keep me off his property because our property runs right side by side each other. So it was odd, yeah. And I've always told Mom I'd really love to know what he's seen or heard. And I know he uses some cameras and stuff too. Wonder if he ain't got something better than I've ever got on the trail cams, which most of y'all probably seen a few things I've got. The best one I got was the one when I had them right here in the yard a couple years, 3 years ago. I called the fog walker, the foggy night. You can see to me what looks like a bipedal figure walking through the fog. It's not clear, but somebody one time did something, and I'm not a tech guy. They did something with that picture where you could pick up differences in heat and the area around it, and it even looked more obvious that there was something physical solid. That's another picture don't prove anything. Anything else?
Yeah, the deputy
Oh, yeah.
run me in the house.
This is years back before we really thought about Sasquatch being in the area. Mom, it's your story. You tell them.
I was sitting out on the deck one night waiting on he was on his way home from work. I was sitting out there. It was after 11 o'clock at night. And I seen this county sheriff's car go
Sheriff's
by.
deputy.
Seen him slam on his brakes and back up. This guy's a great big guy. I mean, huge. And he got out of the cruiser and walked up there and he said, "What do you think you're doing?" And I said, "I'm sitting here waiting on Barry to get home." I said, "He's on his way." And he said, "Well, I got something to tell you." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You need to get your little ass in the house and wait on Barry to get home because," he said, "you don't know what might be wandering around this area."
And I've always told her, to me, that was the interesting part of that. He didn't say who or what. He just said what could be wandering around out here. And that, looking back, why would he say what instead of who? I always wondered about that. And I ain't never got a chance to ask. Of course, most law enforcement and animal control and uh, forest rangers or game wardens or whatever probably know a whole lot more than they're telling. They just maybe won't or maybe can't tell. I believe. You got anything else you want to add before you wander off?
No.
No?
No.
I'm going to see if anybody's got any questions. Anybody got any more questions they want to throw at us? Anything we've rattled off here? Like I said, I did have one sighting. It wasn't what I think at the time I was convinced was a sighting. What I still pretty sure, and this was late 90s, early 2000s. Of course, like I said, I always believe. I was working in Georgetown at the time, driving home late one night, and this was after midnight. I was coming up 27 North, right there. Like I said, people familiar with the area and know what I'm talking about. People ain't from around here. Won't matter. Bill King Hill on 27 North. I started up that hill, it's 3 lanes, 27 North there, one south and 2 north. There was another car in front of me, and he was going kind of slow. So right there at the foot of the hill where the double lane starts, I started to go around and shoot on up that hill because I was tired. I wanted to get home. And I flipped my lights up on bright. Well, way up the hill there on the far side shoulder of the southbound lane, I saw movement. And I was like, well, it's deer. I flipped my headlights up and I started slowing down, braking. As I got closer, I was like, that's moving funny for a deer. And it's still, that hill's high. I think it's the second or third highest hill in Harrison County. I was like, odd moving for a deer. I was probably still, I don't know, 200 yards away from it, too, or close to it. I know I've said sometimes I might have been closer, but looking back at how high that hill is, I'm probably further away from it than I realized. So as it start, to me, it looks like it's either climbing or stepping over the guardrail there on the shoulder, and it just comes right out into the highway, 3-lane highway. And to me, from what I can make out from and my bright lights, and by this time I slowed, if not to a complete stop, just a crawl. And the car that I just passed, it edged past me just slightly, and he did the same thing. So I always said, whoever it was, whatever it was, that guy saw it too. But I couldn't, and I tried to follow him, get him to stop at night, and he would not stop. But anyway, whatever this thing was, just the best I could tell, looked to me like it was on its hind legs, 2 legs, looked reddish brown, and this one really looked big to me from that distance. I've always said this thing might have been close to 9 foot tall. And over the years, people, oh, you saw a bear, you saw a deer, your eyes played tricks on you, it was day, you was tired. I gotta say, I wasn't thinking about Bigfoot when I started up that hill. And looking back now, I'm not sure. I think that's what I saw across 27 that night. Pretty sure. That's a long time ago, and people have actually caused me to doubt that myself in that sighting because everybody, even Dad told me when he said, I think you wanted to see Bigfoot so bad. You did. Well, Dad, if that's the case, I probably need to be in a padded room somewhere because I'm having full blown visual hallucinations. But I always laugh about that. I may be crazy, but I'm not that crazy. And like I said, now looking back, I'm still at least 50%, at least 50-50. And it was no design like a lot of other people said. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just the height, the size impressed me. It looked like it was half as wide as it was tall. If it was 9 foot tall, it had to be 4 foot wide and 3 foot thick from the back to the chest to me. Now I was younger back then. Maybe I don't know. Like I said, looking back now, maybe I got excited and my eyes played tricks on me, or I just fantasized it and turned a deer in my mind and turned it into a Bigfoot. But I really don't think so. And I mean, I know it wasn't a guy in a suit pranking or hoaxing at probably 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, 27 North in a fairly not remote, but or secluded. But I mean, there's no houses right on the road there. And that time of night, you might stand out there for 2 hours before a car comes along to play a prank or hoax on. Even if you knew me, knew I'd travel that road at night, and wanted to play a prank on me, never knew exactly when I was coming through and how long you willing to stand out in the dark in a Bigfoot costume or a gorilla costume waiting to prank me. I don't think it was a prank or a hoax. I saw something. But as far as what goes on around the house and on the property here, I'm like I said, I'm no longer a Bigfoot believer. I'm a Bigfoot knower. Because what I saw crashed into the trees twice now, I'm convinced that's what it was. Absolutely, I'm a knower. I'm convinced. And I brought Mom around with the help of Cliff and Bobo and a few other researchers at the conventions. She had to hear it from somebody other than her own son, but she finally started to kind of come around on it. So we'll keep doing what we're doing. Trying, I always tell everybody I'm just a little fat fella trying to find Bigfoot and make it to heaven someday. So we'll keep doing it. I'll give everybody a couple minutes here. Whoever's still watching wants to ask any questions. Don't look like we got anything. Nothing from anybody? Just give me an exclamation point or something. Give you time to type it in. And kind of in conclusion, Mom's had the better sightings than I have. And everything wrapped up, combined, we can't prove it's Bigfoot, Sasquatch, but I've always said, I've kind of adopted the saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. We found, you got the vocals, or her two sightings, my two partial sightings, prints, vocals, possible tree snaps. I've only found one that I call full blown structure, what I call the Arcway down there over the old river water break. All kinds of odd goings on, odd noises. If nothing else, like I said, the house slapping would have probably convinced me. And then the things over the years, from now that we've learned from friends and neighbors and acquaintances, we're not the only ones that have experienced something strange in the area. So, like I said, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I really don't know what else to add to it. So if nobody's got any questions, Mom was worried we wouldn't have enough to make a show. We went an hour and a half. We didn't make it quite 2 hours, but we made it an hour and a half. So I guess we're going to cut it off here. Anybody watches on the replay, by all means, if you want to leave a question on the replay, I'll see it. And if I can't answer it, I'll get Mom to answer it. Everybody have a good one. Pray for us. Pray for me and Mom. Both of us will pray for you. Pray for each other. God bless you and have a good night.